please. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We are grateful to you, Father, for the world that you have made. We are thankful for this time and this opportunity that we have to meet with one another, with our brothers and sisters, and to study from your word. Father, we are thankful for this revelation that you have given to us, the revealed knowledge of you and your way for our life and your word. And we ask that you would give us wisdom as we study from it, that we may better understand it, that we may better be able to apply it to our lives, and that we may be able to live our lives more closely in accordance with the will that we can discern that you have for us. We are thankful, Father, for all these many things, as we are for everything that you have done, but we are most thankful, Father, that you have sent your Son as an example and as a sacrifice on our behalf to redeem us. And we pray these things in your Son's name. All right, so I am going to read from Psalm 5, and then we'll go through it. I'm going to wait for my slides to do that in a second, and there's some things that I thought were worth noting about the actual language in the text that are worth pointing out, and then we'll see where we can go from there in terms of time. So, Psalm 5, for the chief musician with the Nehiloth, a psalm of David. Give ear to my words, O Yahweh, consider my meditation. Hearken to the voice of my cry, my King and my God, for unto you do I pray. O Yahweh, in the morning you shall hear my voice. In the morning I will order my prayer to you and keep watch. For you are not a God who has pleasure in wickedness. Evil shall not sojourn with you. The arrogant shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all workers of iniquity. You will destroy those who speak lies. Yahweh abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. But as for me, in the abundance of your loving kindness, I will come into your house. In your fear will I worship toward your holy temple. Lead me, O Yahweh, in your righteousness. Because of my enemies, make your way straight before my face. For there is no faithfulness in their mouth. With them is calamity. Their throat is an open sepulchre. They make smooth their tongue. Hold them guilty, O God. Let them fall by their own counsels. Thrust them out in the multitude of their transgressions, for they have rebelled against you. But let all those who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them forever shout for joy, because you defend them. Let those also who love your name be joyful in you, for you will bless the righteous. O Yahweh, you will compass him with favor as with a shield. All right, so first things first about this. What is this psalm about? If we were to read through it, as we have done, to look at what it's talking about, what is the kind of the topic or topics possibly of this psalm? I'm sorry? Certainly, yes. It refers to the wicked and the things that they do.
Well, it's almost a prayer of thankfulness that there is protection from that.
Yep. Certainly also that as well. The protection that we have against the schemes of those that would do evil. And it is, much like the previous psalm, it is a prayer to God, asking and then also expecting, having confidence in the response of God, that we are to be defended from those that would do us harm. It takes a slightly different tack with the emphasis of who it is that is going to do us harm. The previous psalm has it a little bit differently in terms of who it is that is opposing, but in this one it is specifically people that are being deceitful. Right? Those that would say things about us that are not true, those that would slander us in different ways. He speaks of this specifically in verse 6, those that tell lies, bloodthirsty, deceitful men. So it is specifically those that are going to speak ill of us. But then there is the expectation after that God is not a God that will tolerate these things, that God is one who will defend those that look to him and ask for his aid. So again, it is not really a lament of things that are going wrong. There is an expectation of God's protection or response in regards to the one who is seeking him and seeking his intervention. All right, so I have fun I got to turn it on. Oh, I got to turn it on. That will help a lot. All right. Yeah. So in the beginning, we have, the ASV is the version that I put up here because I like it, and I'm the one who gets to choose. The first word there in the preamble or the notes about the psalm, Neheloth, a lot of translations will translate it as a flute or flutes. It is actually a word that indicates an instrument made out of a hollow reed, most likely. It might be a mistake to think of it as a flute like we think of a flute. A reedy sound from an actual proper reed instrument can often have a lot more of a vibration to it than the more metal flutes or the wooden flutes that we're used to. So just a quick note there. And then skipping ahead. So in verse, is this 5? Let me back up. Yeah, the arrogant. This word is translated a little bit differently sometimes or suggested. The response on this is, the word itself has a link to apparently the word praise. In most people's opinion, and which makes this kind of the idea of boastful or arrogant, right? The idea of wickedness combined with this idea of self-praise or this thought of self. Though there are apparently, I'm no Hebrew scholar, there are also suggestions that the linkage could be to something that is wild or untamed, giving the idea of someone who is reckless or fierce in their arrogance as well. So, again, doesn't really alter the meanings of things. The Greek in verse 6 has the word all after destroy. Just a variation from the Hebrew. Doesn't really, again, I think, change the sense, but worth noting. And then the word loving kindness here, this is in the ASV. This is a word that gets translated differently in a lot of different translations. A couple that I looked at, sometimes it's mercy. I've seen it called loyal love. It's a term that you'll see translated differently depending on which version you're using. And then, I know I'm hurrying through this a little bit, but I really like this one too. This is an interesting kind of linguistic thing. Make thy way straight before my face. So some manuscripts have way as plural, making it ways, and some of them have the second line as my way before you, that instead of God making his way out as a straight path in front of us, it is sometimes interpreted as a request to make the path of our life straight in front of us, or in front of him, perhaps in his eyes. This is one I wanted to stop at particularly. Is there a difference of any significance between these two ideas? The idea of God creating a straight path, our path straight, or him laying out his path in front of us as a straight path? Is there a difference between these two that is worth remarking on or trying to decide when looking at translations which seems to be the more apt or correct? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the idea of congruency certainly, or that they should overlap in a sense. Yeah, that our path should be his path, or his path should be our path. That's the way I should put that sentence. Certainly, did I see? Okay. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah, the idea that it should be the same, I don't know that it really matters which way one translates that. In both cases, I think the sense is that we are trying to have our direction, our way of behaving, our life, oriented in the way that God would lay out. And then the straightness of it, the request for that, I think is to make that as plain, right? When you see a straight path, it's a lot more obvious what that path is and where it's going and how to follow it than if it is winding and twisted and you can't see all the ins and outs of it, right? That it is both a plea for, doing what God would have us to do, help in that regard, but then also the knowledge of what that should be so that we can follow it. Wayne, you were going to...
Well, you kind of hit it. My key here is lead me.
Mm-hmm.
So the prayer is to lead me. Because the path is going to be just exactly how you described it. In our lives, we're going around corners and blind spots, and we're just asking that whatever the best straight way through all of that is, that God is leading us, which means we're asking for help and He's giving it to us.
Yeah. The two lines together, as you say indicate that we depend on Him to reveal to us, whether it is through the metaphor of Him leading us, right, as one leads someone who is small or can't see or unable, or by having a path straightened, right? Like, sometimes when you need to get through somewhere, you actually have to clear brush out of the way, or, well, in my house, you have to clear a path through the Legos on the floor so that you don't step on them in the night going to get a drink of water or whatever. But the idea of having a straight path, again, is for someone to do that for you in order to be able to. We're depending on God for that help. Jump down here. So this is in verse 9, the very first there, the way that, and this is, again, bear with my limited knowledge of the way Hebrew grammar and syntax works. The kind of pronoun there is actually just an addition to the actual noun or the word, mouth. And so what you end up is you have a modifier that indicates who it is whose mouth it is that we're talking about, and then the plural or singular nature. In this case, it's actually a singular for mouth. But when translated, most translators in most Bibles you'll see will pluralize it in order to agree with the following line, which is, in fact, plural, their inward part or their heart. I'm not sure that this is an important thing to do or to care about, but it is, I think, an example of how the translator has to apply their own intuition about the way the language should work in order to try and sort out how to make this explicable. So for it to agree in English, it is pluralized, but it could just as easily be, for there is no faithfulness in his mouth, their inward part is very wickedness. Again, the plural singular distinction comes up as a difference between the original and the translation far more often than I think it is really material. I think my note there may have been intended for a different verse, but anyway, there's the word here, destruction. Let me look at my NIV. The word destruction there is actually in the ASV, wickedness. The word there is actually also it's an indication of wickedness, but the word itself has other connotations, specifically regarding desire for this destruction or wickedness, which is to say it is not misfortune, it is not accident, it is an indicator of active malice. So the person being spoken of wants and intends to do evil. It is not simply speaking of someone who has made a mistake or is, active malice. All right, and then I think this might be the end here. Hopefully it is. The preposition, you'll see different translations translate this differently as well. Fall by their own counsels. Some have because of. The preposition is ambiguous. It can be either one. It can mean to be in that condition or as a result of that condition. And the Greek adds the words, O Lord, to the end of the verse, which do not appear in Hebrew. So, all right, I'm going to, another tense ending there, or the plural singular distinction in the last verse, but passing over that then. Any comments to this point? Questions to this point? I don't want to sit here and monologue, though I've done a lot of that. You've been very kind to bear with me in my interest in grammar and words to this, to this degree. So this psalm was considered actually by many people not to be written by David. It says a psalm of David at the beginning. I discussed in an earlier class how this could be easily understood even in English to mean a psalm about David or in David's style or having to do with David in some way. What internal evidence here in the psalm itself might we adduce indicates that David did not write this? There's something here that is a clue in this regard. Yeah, in verse 7 it mentions the temple. Was there a temple when David was king? Was there a temple when David was alive? No, there was not. He was specifically told that he would not be able to do that. Solomon built the temple, and David was dead. There was no temple during his lifetime. But as well, is the psalmist in the temple? What does verse 7 say? It says, I will bow down towards your holy temple. So the verse has them coming into your house. I, by your great mercy, will come into your house. In reverence will I bow down toward your holy temple. Entering the house of God and bowing toward the temple seems to indicate that this is during the time of the exile in Babylon, that there would be a place to go to worship, but that it would not be in Jerusalem, and that they would face towards the temple in order to have their worship service. Now, is this dispositive? No. Does it matter a whole lot? I don't think so. I mean, I don't really mind who wrote this. But it is interesting to find that I think that it's reasonable to think that maybe some of the Psalms that are in here are written by people other than David. We know some of them certainly were. And the of David in the title, I don't think we have to always dogmatically assert means that David wrote it. David died before the temple was built and then toward. So in this, we have a prayer to God that is indicated and repeated in a few different ways. So we give, in the first two verses, give ear to my words, consider my sighing, listen to my cry for help. To you I pray. In the morning, O Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning I lay my requests before you and wait in expectation. There is a repeated theme of prayer, many different kinds of prayer. There's the sighing, a cry for help. There is another word used in verse 2 for the word pray. There is a request for God to hear your voice, or hear my voice, he says. I lay my requests before you, and I wait in expectation. That waiting with expectation. This is a prayer that is repeated, and the psalmist clearly expects that one who prays to God will do so constantly or frequently and in many different modes.
Well, also,
Yeah.
that there is an expectation of an answer to those prayers.
Yes, and that becomes more elaborated on further down in the psalm. But you're right, that there is an expectation that God will answer these prayers. But the prayer itself, in the first two verses, or in three verses, is given in this way where we have it repeated over and over, that this is done in a repetitious manner. The word sighing, frequently translated there in the first verse, only appears a couple times. It's also, I think, Psalm 39. That particular word refers to an utterance that is barely audible. The idea being here that it's similar to, say, Hannah praying in the tabernacle when Samuel thought that she was intoxicated. She was praying for a son. The idea of speaking in a way that is not audible or barely audible to anyone around you, which is a dramatic contrast to a cry for help that follows in the line after it. So it's clearly two different, completely different modes of prayer. There is the loud, lamenting cry for help, and then there is the soft, quiet, one might even say meditative prayer that is almost impossible for other people to know is happening, right? That there is praying that is going on in many different forms. And this, I think, kind of mirrors or patterns the ways that we can pray, or that we do pray. There's the public kind of corporate prayer that we can do here in church. There's the praying that we do with our family at home. There's a sort of internal monologue prayer, and sometimes it happens. I do that a lot when I'm driving, especially when I'm by myself driving, and I don't speak it aloud, or it's not hardly audible to anyone else. And these kinds of ways of doing it are suitable for different places and different locations and different circumstances. But there are all sorts of prayers that we would pray at different times and places, often for the same sorts of things. So pivoting from the praying, I was already moving. Why did I put 7 and 8 there? This is, it is an important point. I should have talked about the evil people first, but 7 and 8 indicate it's not through our merit, but it's God's grace that we receive his favor. Even here in the Psalm, in 7 and 8, he talks about that it is not the fact that he, the psalmist, deserves this, that God will answer it. Not because I, the person praying, am righteous and God should answer me, but out of an expectation of who God is, that God will then do this for him, right? That he comes into the house by the mercy of God, he bows down before him in reverence, and then in 8 specifically, being led in your righteousness, O Lord. It is not ours or the things that we choose to do, but it is when we conform ourselves to the righteousness of God, and through his mercy that we have these sorts of abilities to come to him with our prayers. Hopefully I'm pivoting enough left and right to see if anybody has anything they want to say. Verses 9 through 10 kind of discuss those that are opposed and who they are. They cannot be trusted. They are filled with thoughts of destruction, and they cannot expect God's favor because God is righteous. They do not have the favor of God because they are not in accord with who God is. We are expected to conform ourselves to God rather than he to us. And those that are wicked do not do this, and therefore can expect nothing but destruction from him. And thus the righteous man prays for his own deliverance and judgment on the wicked. And the conclusion is confidence. The one who is praying, the one who is singing this psalm, expects the outcome will be in a particular way. There is the request, there is the desire to be heard, there is the request for deliverance from those that oppose, and then there is a final conclusion in confidence, in expectation that God will do this. What is it that makes the psalmist confident in God? Yeah, the very nature of God, knowing who God is, as God has revealed himself to be righteous, we can put our faith that he will act consistently in accordance with his nature. that he does not love those that do wickedness, right? In the sense that he does not approve of their actions or give them his countenance. We have a kind of a literal saying of this here, which verse is this? In verse 5, the arrogant cannot stand in your presence. This is the NIV. The ASV, if I was to flip back, I think has this literally in your sight, that those that are arrogant and evil cannot stand up in the face of God or in his presence. He cannot countenance them being there. And so as a consequence, those that strive to do righteousness, those that put their faith in God, will be justified by him. And the psalmist has an expectation that that is going to happen. All right, that was my last bullet point. Fantastic. What have I missed? What is it that has leapt out and struck you on the nose about what it is that we've read that's worthy of mention? Yes, sir. Yeah. That theme is kind of throughout the entire psalm, right? That the petitioner, the person giving this prayer, asking God, is supposed to have an understanding to a degree, to what degree we can, of who God is and what God wants. And that the expectation of God's response comes through our conformance or conforming to his will and to his desires, right? What does he want us to do? And if we behave in that way, if we do as God wishes, those are the people that have his favor, and the people that turn their face away, that go their own path, that do the things that God hates, cannot call on God for help in the same way. That he does not favor the wicked, he favors the righteous. Right? This idea of God being a good God, a God that loves uprightness, is a theme throughout. Yeah, Wayne.
I just keep this whole psalm itself brings up so much that's happening right this very minute in the world.
Sure.
We're fighting the trans and 400 letters that describe somebody's other sexual interest. And in all of that, it is an arrogant, all about me, you don't understand my rights. There is no bowing to any authority other than self. And that's what I see all the way through here. That you're praying for deliverance, as you said, but also that the wicked be punished.
Yeah. This is an excellent time to call back to the previous class on Ecclesiastes, where, that's true, but the applicability was there in the time it was written. It was there before it was written. It was there in the intervening period between then and now. None of this is new or will ever change, right? That the world will always be in opposition to God. That there will be...
It's quiet. It reminds me of a riptide. You get caught in one and you know it real quick, but you don't know it until you're about 3 or 4 feet underneath the surface of the water. That's where all the movement is. Right now, the whole... it's open. It's not hidden. There's no quiet agenda. The world is screaming to be separate.
Sure.
And more than I've ever seen in my lifetime, it's just been recent. So, for me, this psalm really brought that out.
Yeah, again, it does certainly go in ebbs and flows and cycles, but, this is the sort of thing that has come before, right? You look at particularly the history of the Old Testament and the way that they would fall away and make these terrible sacrifices to the pagan idols around about, that there are always going to be these kinds of pressures of various degrees of, obviousness to us. But, yeah.
Even Sodom and Gomorrah, it was known as the place that went on.
Mm-hmm.
And was really only, it was never a big deal outside of that area. I don't know if I said that right, but it was known for what it was, and people just left it alone until
Sure.
God's people got involved.
Yeah, we don't have to continue to necessarily belabor the point for everybody, but I mean, we see it again with Babylon, right? Babylon is the referred to as the repository of wickedness. It's the metaphorical one that's used in Revelation as well. And there's Rome. Rome was awfully decadent before the sack of, what was it, some version of the Goths, the Visigoths. Somebody came down and wrecked it in 400 AD. But, there are different points and places where it's, more intense and more pronounced than others. And we will always have to be on guard for some form of this, particularly. Other things, anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, us as Christians should be confident in verse 11 and 12.
Mm-hmm.
It says, let those who love your name be joyful in you. For you, O Lord, bless the righteous, which is us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the righteousness, and again, the pairing that with verses 7 and 8, where the writer has that expectation that it is not through our efforts of our own righteousness, but simply that we desire to do what God wants, that we put our faith in Him, and through His mercy, He considers us to be righteous, which is, an excellent precursor to the truth and wonderfulness of the gospel, that indeed I am righteous in the sight of God, but not through my own merit. But as such, I can expect confidently that God will do what is best for me and that He has my interests at heart and that He will ultimately defend me from the dangers that do threaten. That even if I do suffer death in a physical body, that God is there to defend me in spirit. Yeah, the summation with that confident expectation in God's action is very uplifting. I had not spent, before studying for this lesson, enough time with Psalm 5 to really notice it in the way that I did this time. And it was really, really nice. I enjoyed those verses in this psalm more than I had ever realized I would. I'm getting a little off track. This is one of the great things about actually studying some of the Psalms. There's 150 of them, and you can kind of get boggled by the size of the forest that you forget to enjoy each of the individual trees sometimes. But anyone else? Anything else before? Yeah.
Not so much with the body of the song, but what's your thoughts on their preface on a couple of words?
Oh.
To the choir master for the flute, the song of praise.
Mm-hmm.
What's the point?
What's the point?
Yeah, to the choir master.
Mm-hmm. Presumably, it would have been for the person who was going to lead worship in some form, whether with instrumentation or specifically with singing or maybe all together in the temple. There were groups of people that were specifically designated. I believe they were all Levites, though I would have to double check that. And they're frequently mentioned and listed when you go through the lists in, say, Ezra and Nehemiah. During the return from exile and in the temple, though I imagine, I certainly expect that they were there before, that this was something that both preceded and came after the exile as well, and then I'm sure carried on into the temple that during Jesus' time. There were people that were responsible for leading worship and that for using the Psalms in worship. And so the writer was indicating who this was written for, who it was to be using this. I would be inclined to think no. For the reasons given at kind of the top of the class where I said I'm not sure that David actually wrote this psalm. I don't know that I would say David did. And it could be a later addition. I don't think we need to necessarily consider the notes before the body of the psalm to be theologically canonical in some way. But
regardless of whether David wrote the song or somebody else wrote it, or his pen and his name or whatever, but the significance of who it was directed to.
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it is interesting, potentially, to understand what was the purpose of some of these psalms. There's, and we'll get to some of this in future classes when we get to these psalms. There were certain psalms that were used or began to be used at certain points in time in the, I guess you could say, the Jewish liturgical calendar, right? That they would have certain feasts and celebrations that would occur at certain times during the year, Feast of the Tabernacles and so forth. And certain psalms were used for certain purposes. But I don't think that we necessarily need to take from that we would have to do the same sorts of things. In the same way that you could probably pull any of the songbooks out from the seats here and look at them, and we can see information about who the author was. Sometimes there are scriptures that are attached to them that have a similar idea. But really, the song itself is pretty well intended in most cases, I think, to stand on its own. That what message it has is not in the tune that it's set to, or in the number of times we sing a chorus, or any of the other sorts of directions that were given about the song, but rather the words of the song are intended to be edifying by what they say. And these psalms specifically, the music for them was lost a long time ago, and that they were given new music again in the early church, and then again in the medieval period. A lot of Gregorian type chants were given to a lot of the psalms, and they were set to music all over again. So I don't think that those musical notes necessarily have anything to do with the theology, probably in most cases. But I'd be willing to be wrong. I haven't gone through all 150 before starting the class to check every single one yet, but I think I'm out of time. I'm starting to see small children come in and walk by. Unless there's any other final pressing comments. All right, well, I appreciate everybody's time. I appreciate your attention, and we will talk about Psalm 6 next week. Thank you very much.